Welcome to the July session of Dr. Spotfire. My name's Neil Canungo, and I'll be your host today. For those of you in the US, I hope you had a good July 4th holiday. I know I had a great one. We're back this week, ready to get going with Dr. Spotfire. And today we're going to be doing open office hours. I'm joined by Andrew Berridge today. Now, first, our motto in Dr. Spotfire is learning is not driven by answers, but by questions. And all of our sessions are recorded and put on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. The link is right there on the screen. And we also have a new TIBCO data science channel. You might want to subscribe to that as well. It shows Spotfire with other products from TIBCO, such as streaming and the data science tools. And it has some really cool things you can do with Spotfire on that channel. Now, today's session is open office hours with me and Andrew Berridge. And I put some questions on social media. What do you want to learn about? I put it on LinkedIn and Reddit and Twitter, and we got some variety of different answers. On LinkedIn, we saw a lot of data visualization tips and automating reports. We did get some questions on that. We also had a lot of interest in machine learning and data science. And so what I decided to do is actually dedicate a whole session to machine learning and data science. We're going to do that next month. We're going to do a data function jam session. I'll be joined with Colin Gray and Sweta Kotha, and we're going to show you our whole new data function library page, all these data functions that you can drag and drop into Spotfire and use with the visualization flyout. Now, today, I'm going to start with a couple questions. I got this question from Ahmed on email, and he wanted to achieve this type of graph in Spotfire. So you have all these different points, and you want to overlay a different line. So we'll show that. And also in that same demonstration, I'm going to show the She Loves Data folks were wondering, how can I get the equations off the forecasted lines in the Holt-Winters forecast? So I'll be showing both of those. Let me go ahead and get started with that. So to start with the Holt-Winters forecast, I am on this page. This is actually the data function library page. I'm going to show you one of the data functions from here. Now there is built-in Holt-Winters forecasting, but there's also a data function if you want to get the equation. So you can actually just click this and you can download the data function to your desktop or to your local drive, and you'll unzip that and you'll get an SFD file, and the SFD file is a data function file. So I've already put that into this DXP, and the Holt-Winters forecasting, you can see this, and I have all these data functions already in my flyout. So I can type in my Holt-Winters. Oh, okay, it's not in here. So let me actually find it in my library. If I have them saved in my library, I can find, let's say, my Holt-Winters forecasting. I'll go ahead and pin that to my FX flyout. And now in my FX flyout, I'll always have that Holt-Winters forecasting unless I unpin it. And when you select this, you get to put in your data values. So I'm looking at bike crossings on the Fremont Bridge in Seattle. And I want to look at the west side of the bridge, and those are my data values that I want to forecast. And I want to refresh this automatically. My time steps is going to be my date column on that table. My time units, I want this to forecast over days. The frequency, I want to do 30 days. And that 30 days means what is the periodic frequency of each cycle? Holt-Winters forecasting is a seasonal forecasting, so it looks at cycles of data. So I'm going to put 30 in there, and my forecast periods, how many ahead do I want to see? Let's say I want to see 100 days. Now, these that have these orange not configured, those are the required parameters. There are these that are optional and they don't have the not configured there. So I'm actually just going to use the required parameters, and I can hit OK, and it's going to generate these different tables. So I'm going to skip these recommendations, and it'll generate these different tables. So the forecasting results, the coefficients, and the components of the Holt-Winters equation. So I can hit OK, and that'll actually add it to my analysis. There's these forecasted columns. There's all these tables. So I already have actually created that in here. And what you're seeing on the right here, this blue line is actually fit by the inbuilt Holt-Winters forecasting. So lines and curves, I can see this Holt-Winters forecast. I can turn that off, and then you're going to see the projections here for the upper and lower confidence limit, as well as there's a blue dotted line for the fitted for Holt-Winters. Now, since I have this forecasted data, you'll see this in the background. This was actually created by the data function. So I have a line fit, a lower limit, and upper limit. And all I did is I go to edit and I choose, okay, time steps for my X, My Y, I chose my line fit, and that's going to actually create this dotted line here. So I hit OK. You see that line fit there. So I have that same line. It's overlaid. And because I have these data functions, what I did with this is I actually, in my data functions, I parameterized it. So if I go to my original Holt Winters forecasting that I set up before the session, I can go to edit parameters, and I set up my periodic frequency is tied to a document property, and the document property is then tied here. So that's just so I can demonstrate this easier and show you the inputs. So if I want to change the frequency to, let's say, 7 days, so like a weekly, that's what a weekly a pattern looks like. And let's say I want to see it over, yes, we'll just leave it at 100 days. Now, if I go to this optional parameters, I set one up and I actually tied it into optional parameters. So here I can say, let's say, 30 days, let's put it back on a month. I want to forecast over days. And let's say I want to change my confidence level. So I want to change it to, let's say, like 95%, 96%. That's the confidence level I'm going to get on that. And when you use the optional parameters, it's going to allow you to actually set these by yourself. So I can actually change the beta parameter, which is the trend component. I can change the alpha and the which is the level component. So you can see that going down a lot, going up a lot. So you can actually change these, what are called hyperparameters in the Holt Winter forecasting equation. But if you don't use the optional, it'll actually self-optimize and find the best area for you. You just need to put in the confidence as well. Now you can see these coefficients, and these coefficients are for the Holt Winters forecasting equation. And then there's the components, the A, the B, and the gamma in the equation are all here. So if I go, let me go ahead and just search for Holt Winters in R. Let me take this out. Holt Winters forecasting function in the R documentation. This is actually a little bit messy to read. Let me see if I can find a cleaner one. Here it is. So here's a cleaner one. So this is the equations. So for those coefficients, your S is going to be for each coefficient, and you can kind of plug these in. You can read through this documentation. That's how you get the values for the equations in Holt Winters forecasting. So you can read through this. Everything you need is actually coming off in these tables that are outputted from the Holt Winters data function. Now let's go back to my other slides. All right, so someone had a question. I can't remember it came in. I think it might have been an email, but they wanted to know the nuanced difference between property controls and document properties, limiting by, filters, markings, and more. Basically, there's all these different ways you can filter in Spotfire. You can click and do a marking. You can use the filter panel and filter. You can limit by things in the visualization properties. You can use a document property. There's all these different ways. And the key thing to think about, and I just kind of worked this up as a quick kind of visual example, is what order are things happening to your data in Spotfire? So you have your data source. The next thing that happens is Spotfire is going to run any transformations you have in the data canvas. Then it's going to look at things in the document, like document properties. Those document properties are referred to in the transformations. Then it will load that in the transformations. But if you change the document property, the transformations will already be set and it won't change. And then I'll talk about this a little more in a second. Then you have like data functions and calculate columns, which happen on top of all of that. And then you have visualization. So kind of what this looks like is you have your data source and transformations. That's in your data canvas. And I have certain transformations here. You have the document, like document properties. You have data functions. You have your R and Python engine, and you have your add calculated column. And then you have visualizations with markings. So the way you limit your data is your data source. You can change your query on how you're running your data source. So if you're having like SQL data, you can have a different query, and that's how you're going to filter it at that level. Or if you have a spreadsheet, you just filter on the spreadsheet, and before it comes to Spotfire, it's then run with, and you just get that data. That's all Spotfire can ever see is the data that you send to it. So you change that at the data source level and you query it. Now transformations are done with expressions like filter a column or add a calculated column, replace and calculated column. Those are the transformations. Again, I'm going to show this in a second. And then the document, you have your document properties that you can change. Your data functions and calculated columns are also configured off expressions and scripts. And then finally, you can limit things in your visualizations with markings. You can also filter them with the limit by and the filter panel. So let me go ahead and show this. Let me go out to Spotfire. I got another example up here. So here we have our data canvas. So our data source is on heart disease data. Now, like I said, the first thing is knowing the nuance is what is coming in the data source, how did you query it? So that is the data source that's coming in, and there's nothing Spotfire can do other than what the data you give it. So that's the first level that you can control things at, and that's the highest level at which you can control things at. Everything else is going to be downstream of that. And the data canvas actually demonstrates that downstream because it goes all the way to a data table, and in this data table, I have this changed column, this patient ID. So if I add a calculated column, let's say I can add it here in data add calculated column, or if depending on what version of Spotfire, you get it right here in the canvas. I want to add a calculated column. Let's say I want to do blood pressure level, and I just want to have that just divided by 2, and I'll say half BP. Okay. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Blood pressure level is actually a categorical value. Let me just actually do the systolic blood pressure, which is numerical, not a string. So that was a string. Okay, so we're going to do half BP, and I'm going to hit OK. And now I have this calculated column here. So I use an expression, and you can see it's half BP. So that is done at the data table level. So we kind of jumped ahead all the way to calculate columns here. That's how that's done. Now in between, you have this transformations and document. So for instance, if I want to look at transformations, let's say I calculated a new column here. I put a random number in for something. I replaced certain values. I cleaned up some values. These are transformations. They happen when the data is loaded, and that's it. So you have to refresh your data to reload or rerun these transformations. That is why if you do a transformation, I talk about this all the time. If I do, and actually that is why if you do a transformation that is calculated column or calculate and replace a column, it's not going to actually move dynamically. So let me actually show you this with a document property, which is the next level is a document property. Okay. And so if I go to File, Document Properties, and I go to Properties, let's say my divided value. I'm going to just use something random here. So divided value, and I'll make this a real number, and I'll make this 2 to start. Okay. So I said 2, and now if I go into Add Transformations, calculate a new column, and I say partial, I'm going to do this as that systolic blood pressure divided by, and I can put a fixed number in here and it'll always be the same. Or I can say, what is my divided value document property? Right click, insert as value. And this is going to be my partial blood pressure. It's not going to make any sense, but it's just an example of this expression. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to have this new calculated column, which is my systolic blood pressure divided by 2. If I do the same thing here, let's actually change this to be that document property. So this is an add calculated column that's happening at the data table level, and partial BP calc column. Okay. If I do that, so you can see these are both divided by 2, so they're the same. Now, if I go to data and I go to, let's say I have a property control or something, that any way that I change my document property, I'm going to change this to, let's say 3. What that's going to do is it's going to recalculate the stuff at the end. So you can see this has changed, but it didn't rerun the transformation. The transformation is still at divided by 2, but the recalculated one, the calculated column one, is now actually divided by 3. And that again is because the document happens after, the document properties happen after the transformations, but before calculated columns and before visualizations. So if I wanted to, let's say, run this and have that transformation run on that 3 divided by 3, I could go ahead and I could reload this. And if I reloaded it, then it would all of a sudden change that. Now, the next thing is the visualization level. So here I have cholesterol, and let's say I wanted to say I want to limit this so that so this is a way I'm changing it at the visualization level. I kind of did that quickly. I just right clicked and went to visualization properties and down to limit using expression. This gives you control at the individual visualization level. And that's very useful if you have like corner cases or very specific things you want to show, or if you have dirty data and you don't want to deal with that all right now, you just want to change it on one visualization, you can change it right there. And so I can say my systolic blood pressure, I'm going to filter this to that divided by, I can say 3, or let me say 2, and I'll say, okay, let's see. Oh, sorry. So this must have a Boolean, sorry, because this is a filter. So this must have a Boolean. So I can say this is equal, must be less than, let's say 50, and that'll result to a true or false, and I'll say which columns to show. So if that's less than 50, then let me go ahead and actually put this in parentheses there. And I hit OK, and I hit close, nothing's actually available there. So if I go to data, and that was maybe a little bit too aggressive. So let's say less than, oh yeah, I mean, systolic blood pressure is going to be like in the hundreds. So let's say 120 or 130, and I hit OK. I'm only going to get a few data, I'm going to get less data points there. But if I go and I change this now in this expression, I change this to, let's say, that document property, my divided value. I can put that in here as well, insert as value, there's a document property, and that's going to be divided by 3 now, and it'll change that visualization. You probably can't tell too much because there's a lot right there. Things that are greater than that, less than that, whatever. And these are all in the hundreds. So, but that will actually be dynamic that way. So that is on, again, my slide, my visualizations. I can change it on marking. I can change it on limit by expressions. I can change it by filter. So I showed the limit by expression. The other way is these filters. This happens at the visualization level. And so if I want to remove some patient IDs, I want to look at some different blood pressure levels, you're seeing that filtering across all of these. And this filters is on a default filters filtering scheme, but I can go to data and I can choose, do I want the whatever filter panels on the filtering scheme? I can choose that. I can choose the default filters if I just want to do whatever's in a certain filtering scheme, or I can choose different filtering schemes that way. So I'm just going to, all these are set to the ones that's on the current page. I can leave that. And now the next one is marking, right? So this allows me to select different cities, and it's going to filter down based off of the marking, right? So, or a better way I can show this is, let me unselect that, and let me select this. Oops. Let's clear these filters for a second. So I can clear all these. I can select that. So like these high blood pressure areas, here's where they are, okay? And the reason these are all changing is because they're being filtered by markings or limited by markings, and that's in data limiting. So in data limiting, you have a certain marking that you can use, and then what limiting that you want to limit the data in those visualizations. So that's how it works at the data level. So pulling this up again, this is how it works at the data level. But at an interaction level, there's 2 different ways I would use markings and filters. Now, filters are useful when you know specifically what values that you want to filter to. It's very hard, very cut and clean. Markings are more like a probe. I want to probe around my data. I want to search around my data, mark this, mark that. That's when you want to use markings, is when you're doing a lot of exploration or exploring subsets of your data. But if you want to just limit the whole thing, then you can use a filter. And the other thing to keep in mind is that since those transformation filters, if I said, let's add a transformation here, and there's also a filter rows transformation. This is like using that limit by expression, because it has to result to a a Boolean statement, true or false. That's like using the same thing. But this is going to happen to the whole data table because it's upstream of the data table. So therefore, it's going to happen to all of your visualizations. All your visualizations won't have access to that data because, again, it is happening all the way upstream over here. So that's when you want to use that. The other thing to think about is how these queries and stuff work. So you can do these different groups where you can add new transformations. You can insert one after here, et cetera, et cetera. You can add new transformations, or you can split these up. Now, what this is like when you put these all in separate ones, you can actually see them better. It's actually nice from a usability standpoint. But when you put them all in one window, one little box here, then it actually, Spotfire consolidates that query, and it's actually going to run faster when it loads your data because it's just going to run that query once. What it does when you have separate ones is it runs this query, then it runs this query, then it runs the next query, and it's doing all these in series. So that's how that works. Now, the next question we had was, someone wanted to know how to resize visualizations on in Spotfire. So there's different screen sizes. How do you resize stuff? So let me open up my AutoML DXP here. Let me see here. AutoML. This one has a really good example. I don't want to save changes here. So give me a second while this pops up. So our model, AutoML model explainability, I'm not going to log into anything. I'm just going to use the data that's cached in here. I need to trust all my scripts. So manage trust. Just give me a second to trust all of these scripts. And I'm not connecting to the data science platform or anything. I'm just going to, again, use the cache data. So you're seeing some errors there, but nothing to be worried about. That's just telling me I'm not connected, basically. Now, when I click something here, it's actually going to run something that's going to change the visualizations. So you see how it generated that visualization? So then I can click something else here. Let's say I'll select color. And it's going to run again and change the visualizations. Now, this runs a little bit slow when I'm on Zoom, but you can see that this has dynamically created new visualizations and resized them. So the way this works is, so Spotfire, it is going to fill out these visualizations as a percentage of the screen size. So this is roughly half the screen size. There is a way to read the screen size. So if you have different screen sizes, you just need to read the screen size and then do the algebra and do the math on what should this visualization be in order to have it fit in the way you want it to fit. And usually that really affects you in the text areas because these type of charts, they can resize themselves. Okay, so if I unselect everything, this is going to kind of reset itself back to now one big text area saying getting started and telling me what to do. So how did I do that? That is I can go File, Document Properties, and I can go to Scripts. I have lots of scripts here. So like the reset page, for instance, is going to, so Gaia and I created this. This is a script that is an IronPython, and it's going to say, read these values from my document properties and write out a timestamp, and it's going to actually, that doesn't show too much of the resize. Let's see, execute, let's see. I think this one has it in it. These are pretty big scripts that I've done, but you'll see as I go down here, it's going to tell it what size. I have these functions that are going to tell it what size to make each of the different visualizations. So here it is. So layout R. So there's one layout here, begin selection. We have these type of layouts, 1, 2, 3A, 3B, 4, and R. That's this layout you're seeing right here. So we named those, and then we ran these functions that will then resize the visualization. So you can actually find this DXP on the community for free, and you can actually copy this code. So just look for the AutoML explainability, and you'll find it on our TIBCO exchange, and you can download this DXP. So I just wanted to show that. Now, jumping to the questions that we had, someone was asking about APIs and IronPython. And Andrew, I might tap you for this. I usually use data functions for APIs, but if you want to take a stab at that question and add your insights, yeah.
Of course. So, can I can I share my screen? Excellent, thank you. Just give me a second to move things around. So the question was, there's an IronPython script using the API. Use a function to create or replace a data table in Spotfire, but um, how do you append to that table? Well, there's actually a wider point here. You can think of the IronPython scripting and the Spotfire APIs as a way to automate the Spotfire client. So most of the things that you can do in Spotfire Analyst, you can do via the IronPython API. So typically the way that you would do that in Spotfire, let me just share my screen. Um, Not typically you would do that in Spotfire by doing an add rows operation. So if I were to, um, add another data table, I could see that we have the option here to add rows. So that's the way you append one data table to another. So then my thinking would be, I could go and dig into the Spotfire API and find out how I could do an add rows operation in IronPython, or I could just have a look, Google Spotfire IronPython add rows. And as it happens, there are a number of articles on the internet about appending rows to a table. And so, you just pick your choice and go with that one. I wrote this one actually, as it happens. This one just, that one actually just adds rows with zero values in there, so you can sort out missing values. This one here adds rows to a table and allows you to keep track of the origin of the data using IronPython script. So you can see here we have an add rows settings, and you can see here where we're specifying when you add the new rows, they come in as they got a column that identifies which table they came from, and then we're just going to add the rows to that table. So that's my first go-to reference in order to append rows to an existing data table. There is even a support article on it. So that's what I do whenever I try to think about something I would do in IronPython. So Neil, sorry.
Yeah. So I was gonna add to this comment on adding rows that so first of all, when do you add rows? How do you add rows? So Andrew showed on the data canvas, which would be again my go-to as well. Um, you want to add rows when you're stacking rows. You want to have similar columns, at least a few of your columns similar, because what you're doing is taking one data table that has certain columns, and then you're taking another data table that has certain columns, and you're trying to line those up, right?
You are.
So if you have an API that's pulling in new data, you're gonna want some of those at least some of those columns to be the same so it can stack itself in. Um, One way that I would do it, and we do have this in a previous Dr. Spotfire, is using JSON Lite with the REST API to pull in new data tables and denormalize those data tables, or we're pulling JSONs and then normalize those into data frames and data tables. And essentially, what's coming out of tear there, what's coming out of your R script there, is a data table that can then just be stacked as rows with whatever you have going on. Now, the only reason I would personally use IronPython, there's really two areas where it comes down to. One is there's certain functionality that isn't immediately on the surface of Spotfire, or something like intricate I'm trying to do, or it's not going to be available to a consumer. So I'm trying to create some type of very nuanced behavior. Or the other thing is when I want to implement a bit of logic around the application. So only add rows when certain conditions are met, then I might use Python. Yeah.
Yeah, or if you want to do something repeatedly and keep doing it, or do it over and over again with lots of different data sources and things like that.
Right. Right.
So I just wanted to show this. You saw me Google this live and go to the Spotfire API, and this is more on that add rows settings. And what Neil was talking about was matching columns. So this here allows you to match those columns. So you just have a dictionary of columns from one to the other, and that's how you would match columns using the API.
Yep.
Okay, so it's important to remember that you can basically automate most of the things that you see in Spotfire Analyst, and use IronPython to do that. It's also worth saying that IronPython isn't magic, and you can't modify the default behavior of Spotfire or customize a visualization. It's just designed for it's just designed for automating Spotfire. So we did have a couple of other questions in there. The other one we had, if I can just remind myself, yes, it was around sending automated emails. Shall I answer that one, Neil, as well?
Sure. I do have some stuff open with the COVID report, but you can, if you have something open, you can go ahead and
Well, the COVID thing is, I mean, I was going to just show automation services with
go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
sending an email. Okay. So we do have in Spotfire, you may not be familiar with it. We do have a tool called Automation Services. Now you can think of Automation Services as a headless Spotfire client that runs on the server. And basically you can use that to automate various functions in Spotfire, including sending an email. So, but you have to remember that it runs only on the server, and you can schedule it on the server. So if I go add, the idea is that you have an automation services job, which comprises of various tasks. So the first thing I would do, actually, let me just this is the good thing about doing things live, right? Let me just browse the library. Actually, I want to just save this file. I've been working on many things today, so let me just save that so that I can come back to it. Now, if I browse the library and go to my demo folder, and doesn't matter what I choose, analysis files, baseball, that'll do. So this is a file that is stored in my Spotfire library. I can now create an automation services job to refresh any data if it's got linked data, or replace any data, and then send an email with that. So this is me now producing that automation services job. So I would go open analysis from library, and then I can set to current, and that means it's going to load this file from the library. Now, if you have linked data sources in your Spotfire file, it will refresh those automatically. But if you have other data sources that are loading things from information links, you can add a task to do that. Replace data table, whatever you want. And then if Zoom doesn't slow my computer down too much, and I can actually click, that would be nice. And then what you would do finally is you would do an add task for sending an email. Now, I'm really sorry, but my computer is struggling. Okay, send email. And this send email task needs to be configured by your system administrator. So I know, and also that's the other thing, you have to make sure that automation services is enabled on your server, and that you have a license to set up automation services jobs. By a license, I mean kind of Spotfire permissions. We call them licenses in Spotfire, but you need to have that permission. So now when I've created that email task and my computer wakes up, you know it well.
I know Zoom. I had this problem actually in the past. Zoom just totally slows down
It's
anything?
it's and it's not predictable either. So most of the time, it works fine. It's just occasionally. So he can see this dialogue building up slowly, but the basic premise is that you can say who it's going to, who it's going from, and the message, and then you can add a library link or a web client link, or actually attach the analysis itself. You can also attach visualization images. I would tend to advise not sending the Spotfire file, particularly if it's got embedded data. That could get quite large, and I don't really recommend sending large files by email in any system. But I quite like attaching visualization images. Another thing also to plug now, once you've created this job, you can save it to the Spotfire library, and I can't really demo it because it's going too slowly, but you can
Show it, Andrew, because I actually have that up and I have it all kind of put together so I can show.
yeah,
So let me.
that would be fantastic. You can grab sharing, I think, Neil, because I can't even get to the stop sharing. But it's also worthwhile just mentioning the alerting extension as well when we get to it, Neil, if that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. So what Andrew is showing is, let me see here. Hide these. Okay. So this is our COVID-19 report, and what he's showing is like, okay, basically, so an automation services job builder. I'm going to actually go and I have jobs on the library. So I'm going to open a library item, and these jobs are just XML files. So they're basically just descriptions of what it should do. What
Mhm.
should the job do? And we have this COVID-19. And so we have all of these jobs, and you can see that we were even recently testing some things out just last week or so. So what I have is this is our production job. And what this is doing is it's opening an analysis. We have a data prep DXP, which is doing a bunch of data transformations every day. It's actually doing it every few hours. And it's just checking the internet for new data. It's prepping that how it needs to be done. And it's spitting it out as SBDFs, as flat files sitting on the Spotfire server, so that all of our COVID-19 apps can go and grab those data files, and they're always getting the latest data. So the first step is to just open the analysis from the library, which Andrew showed. And then it's doing a lot of the same thing, which is export data table to library. You can also export to a file if your server has access to a directory. So this is taking the backup data. It's taking whatever data was current and it's writing it to a backup folder. So if anything goes wrong, we can roll back. After it does the backup data, so there's a few tables you'll see where it says over there where production. A few of these say backup data. So it does all the backup data, then goes to production data and gets the new data, pulls in the new data, and then it puts the new data out there in a different folder for production data, and that's what's going to be used by our applications. The last thing it's going to do is then open up another analysis, which is a data checker, and that's going to has basic visualizations that checks, is all the data clean? Did a source change something? And then it's going to send an email to a few of us on a regular interval that has these visualizations and a web client link. So we can also just click on this link, and it'll show you what the latest data is. So an example is, so this just came in. So this is coming in every few hours for us. So let's see this last one. You'll see all of this is what it's sending us. It's highlighting any issues. It's running analysis. If there's any issues with these geometries or these regions, they'll light up red. So this is showing that this data is slightly out of date. It's the 6th now, and the latest data is on the 4th. So it's highlighting all of that for us. And this was last sent 21 hours ago. So that's how you set up the job. Showing in automation services, this was just setting up the job.
Sorry. Can I just? I mean, this is fantastic stuff, Neil, and I know because we set some of it up together, and I thoroughly enjoyed doing that with you. So what we've discovered with it as well is it's as well as a useful analytics tool. It's also a very good tool for um, checking to see whether things are working properly, right? So that's what we're using it for. We're using it to
Right.
check things are working. properly.
We're sending almost an internal report to ourselves, a developer report to ourselves, but you
Mm.
can use this to send out reports to others. So you saw
Yeah.
that there was so this has now failed, right? You saw there was a little hazard icon there. So the last run, this actually failed. And this is the automation services. If your administrator, you have access to this, or if your administrator gives you access to this. But what you do is you schedule a job and you find that job file that we just saved to the library, that we built and we would save to the library. You find that job file, and then you're able to you select it, and then you can add a schedule to it on how often you want it to run, and that will just run from the server. And then if it fails or if you have any issues, you can actually go to it, and you can read logs on it. And where are the logs here? Actually, here we go. Library job activity. View logs, and then you can actually diagnose if there's any issues in there. And we are seeing some issues with our COVID-19 data, because as more and more data comes, it's just kind of really expanding how much data needs to be used. So we're doing different things to actually partition that data and store some of that data, so that it doesn't all have to be recalculated and regenerated each time.
That's right.
And then while I'm here, there is the scheduling and routing, which is how you cache the analysis into RAM. So this COVID-19 analysis is several gigabytes of data, but you'll see I just loaded it in 1 second, or roughly a second. It loaded all of that, and so that scheduled updates is there.
So Neil, could we just talk about the alerting extension quickly? I don't
Sure.
know if you can Google Spotfire Alerting, because that's also a useful thing to be aware of. We've actually built an extension for alerting for Spotfire, so that if certain parameters go out of range, then you can send automatic emails just when things go out of scope or out of range. So this tool is available. It requires services to set it up, but if you have a need for this, then we can certainly get that set up for you. So it's important to remember that, or know that this exists, and it uses our automation services behind the scenes.
Yeah, if you're trying to understand when one of your values change, let's say when you're looking at equipment or something and it drops below a certain value, or let's say sales in a region drops below a certain value, you need an alert on that. You can use the alerting extension for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
We do have another question around this alert around automation services. The question is, do we need setup permissions on the Spotfire server to configure outgoing email details? Yes, you do. It's a one-time setup, and it's a server administrator that has to go into the automation services configuration and set up SMTP details and things like that.
yeah, so you can find a article here on how to set that up, and an administrator needs to set that up.
Cool.
Now,
Thanks.
yeah. So last thing I wanted to talk about, just before we wrap up time here, is there was another question that I promised I'd go over, and that was on the differences between using filters, filter transformations, document properties, data limiting, things like that. So there's in marking. So there's multiple ways to drill into your data in Spotfire. Just a kind of review of what I'm talking about here. Let me just throw in a random chart just so there's something on here. So there is a filter panel that you see here. There is in the settings, the visualization properties, there's a limit data using expression. There is a flyout where you can add a transformation. There are document properties. And then there are, of course, markings. So let me color this by continent. There are, of course, markings that you can drill down on. So the way I would try to describe or advise on best practices here is one, marking is when you're kind of probing your data. When you want something specific, like a specific range, that's where filters become really useful. But marking is when you're just kind of generally trying to explore the insights. You're not necessarily going for something specific. So that's my advice on markings versus filters. The next is when to use the limit data functionality in the visualization properties. So I think a really good example is here. Actually, let me go to the states and provinces. So I could have a filter here, which is a list, but instead I wanted a drop down. And there is no filter drop down, but there is a property control drop down. So if I go to edit text area, this little checkbox is a property control. And so I have a property named province.overview.selected, and it's currently set on India. What I want that dropdown to show are all of the unique values that are in this table and it's in the column country region of my province and state table. But I don't want to include Australia or China because that data was actually kind of messy. So I have this condition to not include that, but it's including everything else. If I wanted to not include Brazil, I could say, and not Brazil. And then Brazil comes off that list, right? You saw there. So now I have these set values. And if I change this, if I change this value, it's going to change what this document property is. And why that is useful is because I can use this like a filter. So I'm changing it to Scotland here. And I use it as a filter by going into, here I'll go into my layer, my data limiting. And what I'm saying is if the country region in this table is equal to this document property, then show that. But I'm also showing, here's another thing, if it's less than what the date slider is, less than or equal to the date slider value. And I've put these conditions on all of the visualizations here. So it's a little tedious to put this on all of the different visualizations on the page, but it allows me good control because one is I get the drop down for the country, but the other is if I want to see everything up until November 29th, you'll see it's only going up until November 29th. It's only going up until, because I was able to use that expression and the logic in that expression to say less than equal to. If I used a filter here, I would only be able to show one date with the item filter slider or a range, and then you would have too much going on. But this is able to show everything up until a date. And that's also good when we're trying to like calculate trends and increases, things like that. So that's when I would use, again, that's when I would use the document property. Now, the last one is when do you use a filter transformation? So filter transformation, we go to data and I go to, where's my data? Canvas. Okay. So filter transformation is when you go into add transformations and you have this filter rows here and you can add expressions and logic in there. Now, the only time I'd really use this is when you know that you're not going to need that data in the rest of your analysis. So if you know that this final data table, whatever's coming through here, and that you're using all your visualizations and your data functions, if you're not going to need that certain data, you can filter it out. And furthermore, I would actually recommend putting that filter transformation on this first node, on the data loading node, because what that's going to do is actually never even load that data into Spotfire to begin with. So it's going to keep your analysis loading faster that way. So that's a really big advantage of using that type of filter transformation. The other thing is, since I think Spotfire 10.5, you can add certain comments in there. So if you're filtering out null values or certain values here in this COVID analysis, there's a lot of countries with weird names that need to be replaced and things like that. You can add those comments in for other people by going to any one of these expression-based functions, and you can do a // and put your comment here. So that's another reason to maybe use a filter transformation and make sure you document that. All right. Well, thanks, Andrew, for joining us today. That's going to do it for today's open office hours session. Next time, and on August 3rd, we're going to be doing a session on those data functions and the data function flyouts. I highly recommend checking it out. We're going to show you how to plug and play and how to really evolve yourself from just a business analyst that might be creating reports to someone that's actually doing some advanced analytics and making it really easy for you. So we're going to do a lot of that machine learning and data science examples there, as well as just some general use cases. So be sure to join that. So me, Colin, and Sweda, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining today.